If you want to have the best workout possible, this is exactly what you're going to eat, how you're going to hydrate, how much caffeine to have, when to have it, everything you need to know about pre-workout nutrition for the best training possible. Let's fucking get straight into it, why don't we? Let's scroll over here. Here we go. First thing up, we're going to start with food because this is probably what most of you are most concerned with. The other things are pretty simple. Well, of course, with everything, there's nuance and we could get very complicated, but I'm going to try my best to keep it simple. So, general principles, general goals of our pre-workout meal is what seems to potentially be the most important thing. There's a good amount of evidence to support this, is avoiding hunger. So just hunger suppression in general, meaning we probably don't want to go into our workout fasted, especially if we're in a deficit and we're super hungry. We're definitely going to want to eat beforehand. I would almost never promote training fasted. Some people will tell you that it doesn't make too much of a difference. I disagree, depending on the context, of course, but we want to suppress hunger. That's going to be the most important thing. The actual composition of this food isn't going to be as important, most likely, in comparison to that. And if you're wondering where this evidence comes from and where this idea comes from, there's some studies that have looked at essentially feeding people a placebo breakfast. I don't know how the fuck they even do that. I think they used liquid, because it must have been, you can't have 0-calorie solid food, I don't think, unless maybe they made some shit up. But I believe they gave them a 0-calorie sweetened shake, some kind of liquid, and they told them that it was a protein shake with carbs or whatever, and they compared that to actually an actual caloric energy fucking containing drink, and I believe they performed similarly. Now, of course, we got to take that with a grain of salt, but there's been multiple studies that did something similar to that. There's also other studies that have looked at specifically how much of an impact does carbohydrate content have on workout performance, and it doesn't typically show too much of a difference. Now, again, research has its limitations, and if we understand physiology, then we kind of understand why we do want to prioritize our carbs, and I'm going to explain that in a second here. But the research does also kind of inform the physiology in a sense. They go hand in hand, so it is important to understand. But to keep it simple, we want to avoid hunger. That seems to be the most important thing. Now, we also want to fill up our glycogen stores. So we want full muscle glycogen, which is basically stored carbohydrate in our actual skeletal muscle. And then we also want full liver glycogen. Now, your liver glycogen is going to primarily control your blood sugar, which seems to be very important, especially for more endurance type of training, but as well as we can kind of extrapolate that to resistance training. We don't want to be hypo or hyperglycemic, meaning we don't want to be too low or too high blood sugar. We want to be somewhere in the optimal range, which is, I believe, about 70 to 100 milligrams per deciliter, I think is the unit of measurement there. I should know this. And I was just talking at work. Somebody was saying, one of the relatives had 300. Their blood sugar was 300. And I was like, are you 300? That's insane to me. But anyways, it's a random tangent. But so our liver glycogen is going to primarily control our blood sugar, because if our blood sugar goes too low, we will break down the glycogen in our liver, glycogenolysis, the breakdown of glycogen, to then release glucose to raise our blood sugar, and vice versa. If our blood sugar is too low, our liver will create glycogen, or will create glucose, I should say, gluconeogenesis, the creation of glucose. Keep fucking it up. That's all nerd shit. Just know we want to fill up our liver glycogen so that our blood sugar is in a good place, essentially. And the way that we're going to do that is primarily our pre-workout carbs, as well as our carbs overall. But to top it off is going to be our pre-workout carbs, which I'll talk more about in a second. But the main idea there, the reason I have liver glycogen specifically written there, is that our muscle glycogen is primarily going to be filled up with our diet overall. There's a good amount of evidence to suggest that it gets filled up over a long time horizon, potentially an entire day, multiple days even, depending on the context. And this is more so studied in endurance training, because they're actually going to be using a more significant amount of muscle glycogen. But it's still related to resistance training, and it's still relevant, is what I'm trying to say. But to keep it simple, to fill up our muscle glycogen, our total daily carbohydrate intake is going to be the most important thing. And then to fill up our liver glycogen, again, total daily intake is most important, but we want to top it off with our pre-workout carbs, which we will see what this actually looks like in practice in just 1 second here. Now, another thing we might want to do here is we might want to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. And the reason I have this in question mark, or I put a question mark there, I was going to say in quotations, even though it's not in quotations, you dumbass Nick. Okay. Is that, dude, this shit takes so much out of me to talk this fucking fast and this much. Sorry. But the reason I have it in question mark there is because depending on when you're working out in the day and what your diet overall looks like, this may or may not be important. Where it is probably important is if we are training fasted. If we are training fasted, which again I said you don't want to do, but you could also extrapolate that to training without protein. It's the same thing. Like if you just had carbs before your meal, which I would suggest if you were training very early in the morning, which you'll see in a second again, then we would probably... Okay, I'm pausing here. I need a second. I barely even paused. I hit pause and I'm going back to it. Fuck you guys. If you were training without protein, you would want to get protein in ASAP afterwards. That's the anabolic window idea. Even then, it's still, you probably have like an hour or two. Even then, if you go a little bit longer, it's not a big deal realistically. But that's not the point I'm trying to make here. The point I'm trying to make here is that we do likely want to stimulate MPS if we can. If we have the time to let the food digest beforehand, then we do likely want to stimulate MPS. That way we don't have to worry too much about getting protein in after our lift. And it just makes sense in general if we understand protein balance, how we want to remain in a positive protein balance as much of the day as we can. And after fasting overnight, you're likely going to be in a state of where muscle protein breakdown is exceeding muscle protein synthesis, where nitrogen, you're in a negative nitrogen balance state because protein is one of the, if not the only nitrogen source from the diet. So that's another way to judge that, to measure that, but not important practically speaking. Anyways, we probably want to get a protein feeding in just to spread out our protein intake, to stimulate MPS before our lift, and to potentially help with satiety. You might find that if you just have carbs beforehand, and one of my clients just messaged me this recently, was that they were just having carbs beforehand, like just cream of rice, and then they added protein in, and they said they felt way better afterwards. Now, it was just like a one-time thing. They haven't repeated it yet to my knowledge, but I told them keep trying it. Let's see if it continues to improve. And I know I've noticed this personally, that essentially, whether or not it's because of the satiety thing, if that's just what's happening, I don't know. It seems to be what's happening, is you are less hungry because the protein keeps you satiated, keeps those carbs kind of working longer, if you want to put it like that. May help with blood sugar control if you are somebody who needs to worry about that, which if you have any form of insulin resistance, then all this stuff the importance becomes amplified. And the reason I care so much about this and why I've put so much time into researching this and experimenting is because I used to have reactive hypoglycemia, meaning I would go low blood sugar right when I would try to work out, which is the last thing you want, as I said, when you're trying to work out. And so we've been experimenting with a bunch of stuff, and whole nother story. I don't have time to explain all that, but point is, if you have any sort of trouble there, all this stuff becomes increasingly more important. For somebody who's insulin sensitive, who has no trouble there, this likely doesn't matter that much. Again, your total diet is going to be the most important thing. And that's something that I want to emphasize here, is that a good pre-workout meal doesn't make up for a shit diet overall. If your diet's dog shit, you're not eating enough calories, you're not eating enough carbs, you're eating a bunch of if it fits your macros bullshit stuff with terrible ingredients that's fucking up your gut, all these different things, but you're having a good pre-workout meal, that's not going to negate that shit. It might help a little bit, but it's not going to solve the problem. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound type shit, or some kind of other cornball fucking analogy there. So, a good pre-workout meal should complement an already good diet, is the point I'm trying to make. Now, with that said, as I alluded to there, we don't want to have any kind of GI discomfort. We don't want a ton of food to be sitting in our stomach, feeling heavy, feeling sluggish. We don't want to have to shit ourselves or have gas or any kind of discomfort at all, acid reflux, esophageal problems, like anything at all like that. Now, the way we want to avoid that is we want to eat simple whole foods that we typically digest well. We don't want to have a large amount of fat or fiber before our workout, a large amount of protein either. A ton of carbs. We don't want to have a ton of anything. Basically, we want to keep our pre-workout meal pretty light, but enough to keep us satiated. So it's about finding that middle ground. And in terms of avoiding GI discomfort, That's a whole nother video for another day. Way too complicated. But simple terms, don't eat anything stupid. So keep your pre-workout meal, especially in all of your meals before your workout, keep them as simple as possible. If you're eating things like maybe like sweet potatoes, which I know for me personally cause problems for me and I avoid them for that reason. Now, that's not to say that you should just avoid any food that causes problems, but if it's pre-workout, you do, in my opinion, you do want to avoid it. Save it for after your workout. If you know it might cause problems, let's say you struggle with dairy, for example, save it for after your workout. If you're going to have a yogurt bowl or whey, save it for after your workout. Just play it safe, okay? That's the main idea there. Now, in terms of timing, this is going to dictate everything. As I alluded to with the protein already, this is going to dictate the quantity of food you're eating, the composition of food you're eating in terms of if you should have fat, if you should have fiber, if you should have protein, how many carbs you should have, what types of carbs you should have, and a million other things. It all comes down to timing, and you're going to see some examples of this in a second. Those are the main ideas when it comes to the goals of our pre-workout meal and the general ideas. Now let's get into some more practical application. So, part 2 of food. So some quick things we want to touch on. In terms of carbs, something we will probably want to take advantage of is mixing glucose and fructose. Now, glucose and fructose are just two different kinds of monosaccharides, which are, in simple terms, just quick sugars. Essentially, carbs are just chains of sugars, and there's monosaccharides, meaning one sugar. There's disaccharides, meaning two sugars. There are polysaccharides, meaning many sugars. Don't worry about it. Basically, quick digesting versus slower digesting. We want to have probably faster digesting if, especially, we are in that 30 to 90 minute window. And I'm going to give you some examples of multiple different timings here in a minute, as I keep alluding to, as I keep edging you, like I do every single fucking video. But point being, if we mix glucose and fructose, it seems like we can improve the absorption time. There's a good amount of evidence to support this. There's a couple papers on this, and we understand mechanistically that these different sugars essentially seem to use different transporters within the intestines to actually enter the bloodstream and enter, potentially enter glycolysis. Don't worry about that, but to essentially be used, to be absorbed. They use different transporters, meaning there is less constraint and we can absorb more at once. So I forget the exact numbers, but it's like if you were just having glucose, maybe it's a gram per minute on average is a general estimation, versus if you add fructose in there, it might be closer to a gram and a half per minute. Don't quote me on those numbers, and it's not going to be the same for everybody because of a lot of different things, but those are some general rules of thumb you can kind of use there. The point is, though, that we want to mix sources here. So what this looks like in practice, again, you'll see, but fructose primarily comes from fruit sources. Pretty easy to remember, fructose, fruit. So, and different fruits are going to have different contents of glucose versus fructose. Something like orange juice has a very similar quantity, a very similar composition, almost 50-50 glucose and fructose. Same thing with bananas. Now, something like, I believe mango is typically higher in fructose content. What's another example? Honey is more fructose than glucose, I believe, but it has a good mix. So these are things to keep in mind. You can just Google that, AI it, whatever. That might inform your decision making there. Now, some people may find that if they have too much fructose at once, they might experience some GI distress. And specifically with FODMAP, more FODMAP foods, again, look up what that means, higher FODMAP foods. Fermentable oligosaccharide, disaccharide, monosaccharide. I don't even remember that. I forget the acronym. I'm not gonna lie, but it doesn't matter. Look that up if you want. Point being, you might want to keep that in mind. Potentially chill out on the fructose content if you need to, but probably not a huge deal either way. Now, point is there, we want to mix the two. So something that's going to be more glucose based would be like rice cakes. Anything rice based is going to be primarily glucose, right? So you could just have the fruit. Like I said, you could just have banana. That's going to give you fructose and glucose, which is awesome. Or you could combine something like rice cakes, cream of rice with some kind of fruit. You will see that in a second. And you see, I put there quick digesting because if we have like 30 to 90 minutes, then we probably want to have more quick digesting food. We don't want to have things like fibrous sources of foods like potatoes, vegetables. These are going to digest slower, might cause some GI discomfort potentially, but The main idea is that they might digest a little bit too slow. They might sit in our stomach for too long or not be absorbed in time for our actual workout, which we don't want. So the timing is going to be everything there, but we probably want to prioritize quicker digesting carbs there. Now, this is a general rule of thumb you can use. What I like to use is about 0.5 to 1 gram per kilogram of your body weight, depending on the timing. So if we have like 30 minutes, you definitely want to err closer to the 0.5 grams per kilogram. So if I'm 80 kilograms, that's going to be like 40 grams of carbs if you couldn't fucking figure that out somehow. Sorry, my computer's overheating and I'm sweating like a pig. Fuck me. That's what happens when you record in your fucking car like a loser. And then if we are closer to the 60 to 90 minute window, then we can probably err closer to the 1 gram per kilogram. Now, this will depend on your entire diet overall, how many carbs you can actually fit in your diet, of course, as well as what you tend to feel best on. Like everything, these are not set in stone rules because everybody's different and there's so many different factors that can influence the absorption, digestion, everything. Just experiment, see what works best for you. I've tried so many different combinations of meals, like different fat amounts, different timings, everything under the sun. So it's all a game of experimentation. These are just hopefully guidelines to help you guide your experimenting, and who knows, maybe they'll work perfectly for you. You'll try like the general guidelines I'm giving, they'll work perfectly for you, and that's amazing. That's my hope, of course, but it's not always going to work out that way. So take everything with a grain of salt, experiment, see what works best for you, bang. Now for protein, again, we're almost definitely going to want this to be quicker digesting, even if we have 90 minutes, which if you are going to have protein, I would err on the 60 to 90 minute side of things. I definitely wouldn't have protein if you're 30 minutes out, which I'll talk about in a second. But whey is probably going to be your best option here because it's quicker digesting than something like casein, which if you're having like any kind of like yogurt or milk, those are primarily going to be casein. I believe it's about 80% casein, 20% whey in milk protein. So that's going to primarily be slower digesting protein. So we probably want to have something like whey, which is going to digest quicker, like I said. Now, caveat here, a lot of people can struggle with whey, whether it's the lactose content in the whey, which in that case you can have whey isolate, I believe is the one that has less lactose, or maybe it's concentrate. I'm pretty sure I fucked this up last video. I forgot which is which, but one of them has less lactose in it generally, so try to get that one if you can. That'll hopefully solve that problem. If lactose is your problem, which it is for a lot of people think they have a lactose intolerance issue, which would be usually a lack of lactase production, the enzyme that breaks down lactose, which is a sugar. Sorry, I'm nerding out on you right now, but a lot of the time, what seems like a lactose intolerance is actually a casein issue. So having whey might actually be a better option there for that reason as well. But with all that said, pick a quick digesting protein there. You probably don't want to have something like beef, which is probably going to be slower, especially if there's fat in there, which there almost always is going to be. And then we want to have like 20 to 30 grams as a general rule of thumb, just enough to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. The source of the protein will dictate the quantity there, because the actual amino acid content of the protein will dictate what's going to happen there. Specifically, leucine and essential amino acids overall is what you want to look for. You want to have a complete protein, meaning it has all of the essential amino acids, and specifically leucine. Those seem to be the most important in terms of triggering muscle protein synthesis. But if you're getting like 20 to 30 grams, then you don't really have to worry about it, in my opinion. Especially if your total intake is equated, it doesn't matter at all in that case, realistically speaking. So don't even bat an eye about that. Just get in like 20, 30 grams if you have the time for it. And then, again, timing's everything here, but if we're 30 to 60 minutes out, I would keep fat and fiber below 5 grams. I would, as a general rule of thumb, of course. Maybe avoid it altogether, especially if you're closer to like the 30 to 60 minute window. Then I would avoid it altogether if you can. So maybe instead of having like mixed berries, you have like orange juice, or a banana has like a gram or two of fiber, I believe, but it's still going to be significantly less than mixed berries. So yeah, those are things to keep in mind. Again, these will slow down digestion. Fat and fiber will slow down gastric emptying, meaning food will stay in your stomach longer and therefore digestion will be slower. That's what GLP-1 primarily does, and why that helps you stay fuller for longer. A little random fun fact for you if you didn't know. Protein will have the same effect there, so those are things to keep in mind. Holy fuck. I am gassed here, boys. But time for actual meals now. Let's get it. Let's get it. Okay. I don't even need this. No, I don't think you can even see that. But, okay. First scenario. This is the ideal one, which is what I've kind of been alluding to mostly here, is if we have like 75 to 90 minutes, you can use 60 minutes and kind of group that in. It'll depend, like, how close is your actual first set to your last bite of your meal, because like you got to account for warm-up time if you're somebody who warms up before your workout, and also commuting time and how long it takes you to eat. Like if you have your first meal at 8 o'clock but it takes you 20 minutes to eat it, then that's another thing to account for. So I like to use, like, in terms of these numbers, I base that off of when I finish my last bite of the meal. I finish the meal, and then when I start my first set, essentially. Now, again, like, a couple minute differences here is not going to make it much difference realistically, but it's something to keep in mind. That's just how I like to think about it, what I would recommend. So this is the ideal scenario. This gives us enough time to have some protein, to let it digest, to let all the carbs digest, hopefully, for them to actually enter our bloodstream and to then be pulled in by our muscle cells and to fill up our liver glycogen so that we have full glycogen stores, stable blood sugar. We're not crashing during our workout. We're not having that insulin spike and blood sugar crash. Again, depending on your individual insulin sensitivity and different things there, this will kind of be more or less of a problem. Like for me, it can be a very big problem if I have a post-workout or what am I thinking of? Post-meal reactive hypoglycemia, meaning low blood sugar, then I'll be fucked. But if you don't experience those things, then it's not going to be as big of a deal for you. You might not even notice the sugar crash, quote unquote. Now, don't just think that because you're lean that you can't have some sugar problems, because I'm pretty lean, I'm very active, and I still seem to have some form of insulin resistance. I think it's likely due to my chronic poor sleep and higher stress, which can do it. But that's a story for another day. Again, I don't have time to explain all that. But this is my go-to meal here. I've had this every pre-workout for a fucking long time. I fucking love it so much. For me personally, this is what I like to do based on my macros, my needs, but don't worry about the quantity here. What I like to do, 4 lightly salted rice cakes, 1 scoop of whey that I make into this whey drip, paste, icing, whatever you want to call it. I like to have like a thicker consistency, so it's more like a consistency. I fucked that up. So it's more of like a paste or icing. It's fucking awesome, especially if you get a good protein. Throw that on there, and then cut up a banana, and then we'll throw on some honey as well if we want some more carbs, some more fructose especially. And then I'll throw on some cinnamon, which will help with the glucose control, the sugar control, potentially a little bit. And then some light salt. Light salt is a mix of potassium, sodium, and iodine, which we'll talk about electrolytes and hydration in a little bit. But that's going to give us a mix of potassium and sodium and iodine. Not as important in this context. So in this meal, we have glucose and fructose. We have whey, so quick digesting protein, quick digesting carbs. We have cinnamon to help with the digestion and absorption of these carbs and the control of our blood sugar. And we also have sodium and potassium. This hits all of your needs. It's super simple, super easy to digest, which is the main thing here. You can see I'm not having like potatoes or any kind of weird shit. Ideally, your whey protein is going to be very minimal ingredients. A lot of wheys are going to have gums and sweeteners and sugar alcohols and things that we probably want to avoid. Again, I'm not telling you to I'm not fear-mongering these things. They're not going to cause problems for everybody, but they probably will for a lot of people, especially in my experience. And if you want to have them, that's fine. Just have them after your workout to play it safe because of the reasons I already explained. So, yeah. Again, you can have cream of rice instead of the rice cakes, or you can have actual rice and you could have like rice and pineapple or something like that. That might be a good idea, especially if you're going to have like chicken with that. The pineapple will help a little bit with the digestion of the protein specifically because of the bromelain content in there. So that's another thing you might want to look out for. I think I said that in the next example, not this one. But here we got a quickie. If we were working out like first thing in the morning or like straight after work or whatever kind of weird circumstance you might have based on your schedule, and we don't have time to have a meal and wait an hour or two beforehand, or an hour or two afterwards, I think is what I'm trying to say, then this is what I would recommend. I would avoid all fat, fiber, and protein, and I would just have carbs, ideally a liquid carb like orange juice, You could mix in some honey in there as well. Orange juice is probably the best bang for your buck because it has glucose and fructose pretty much 50-50, like I said, if I'm not mistaken there. It's a liquid, so it's going to digest a little bit quicker. It's probably going to be easier on the gut for the same reasons. And you're going to get some potassium in there, I believe, as well. Not really a significant amount, but a decent amount. You could also have something like coconut water. That might be a great option here as well. But yeah, and then if you want to throw some honey in there for some more fructose, a little bit of glucose as well, then that might be a good idea depending on the quantities of the two and the timing and your individual macros, your size, etc. But yeah, I would just have like 100 milliliters of orange juice. That's like 25 grams of carbs worth. If you want to throw in a little bit more carbs, have like 10 grams of honey. That'll give you like, I think like 15 more grams of carbs, something like that. Take those numbers with a grain of salt. But yeah, that would be my suggestion there. If you were working out early in the morning, this is what I would do. I would throw in some light salt in there as well. It might taste a little nasty, but that's my intro workout. Is I'll have orange juice, honey, and some light salt. I've found that to work very well. Now, that's a video for another day in terms of intro workouts, but that would be my recommendation if we got a quickie, if we just got to get a nut off real quick. No, I'm just kidding, but all right. And then I couldn't think of anything like quickie for long, so I don't even know. I wrote this all yesterday, but yeah. So this is if we have 2 hours plus, where now we might want to implement some of those other things that I was telling you to probably avoid, like slower digesting protein, slower digesting carbs, fat, the things that are going to slow down the digestion of our food. Here, we might want to implement them. We probably do, because if we have just quick digesting carbs, we're probably going to digest that shit, break it all down, absorb it, and then 60 minutes later, we'll head into our session. Maybe we're a little bit hungry now. Maybe our liver glycogen is a tiny bit depleted. It's not going to really be depleted much if you were sedentary the whole time or even just walking a little bit. So it's not going to be a big deal either way. But if we want to be optimal here, then we probably want to have a little bit slower digesting for those reasons. The hunger one probably being the primary focus, again, as I already said. Now, this could look like meat, potatoes, and fruit, just as a simple example. Like I said, potatoes will be slower digesting because of the starch content as well as the fiber content. And we can throw in some fruit in there for a mix of fructose as well, like I said before, and because fruit is great, and you might get more fiber depending on the fruit choice that you have. I'm sweating like a pig right now, bro. Oh my gosh. Meat is going to be slower digesting generally, especially if it's something like beef, which again, if you have more time, you might want to have to get that additional slowing of digestion. Or you might want to have something like chicken, which is going to be leaner, going to digest a little bit quicker. You might want to have some pineapple, like I said, to assist with the digestion of that because of the bromelain. Watch my last video, I believe it was my last video, on how to create your own diet. I go in more detail on like the general ideas of some of these things. And I also talk about all the stuff that I'm talking about here, just in very much less nuance, less detail, which is why I'm making this video now. But yeah, if you want to watch that, go watch it. I would highly recommend. A lot of free game. So much free game on this channel, man. Just for 60 subscribers is fucking nuts. But it will all pay off one day. I believe it. So shout out to y'all if you're already supporting me. I fucking love you. Please like and subscribe if you're watching this. I would really appreciate it. But, and then, as I alluded to there, if you have like 2 hours after that meal, by the time you're heading into your workout, you might be a tiny bit hungry. You might be a tiny bit depleted, like your liver glycogen. Probably not, but it might make sense to just top things off with like a piece of fruit, maybe a banana, some orange juice. Again, if you want to follow the same principles as this, you could definitely do that. And I would recommend that. Follow the same principles, avoid protein, everything like that. Just get some quick carbs in like that 30 minutes prior. If you find that you feel better doing it, you might feel worse doing it. Holy fuck, look at my arm. Okay, sorry. So yeah, that's going to be an experimentation thing like always. But yeah, hopefully this gives you a general framework. I don't know why I can't zoom out. Here we go. I believe I have some more stuff. Don't worry, don't you go anywhere yet. 33 minutes, let's go. I need a water break, hold up. Woo, that water was good, boy. All right. Those are 3 different meal examples. Take the principles, apply it to your specific situation. These are general guidelines again. So yeah, like you could also just take this meal here Add some peanut butter to it, for example. If you were in this camp here, that's another thing you could do. You can get creative. Use some critical thinking, my friend. You get what I'm saying? All right. Okay. Caffeine. This is gonna be quick. The research on this is the vast majority of it, again, is on endurance training. Now, to my knowledge, there's not that many studies that have looked at resistance training and have actually shown benefits, but this is one of those things where you can use anecdote. If you have caffeine, you're probably going to perform a little bit better. You're going to feel a little bit more wired, a little bit more focused, a little bit more energized. If you've ever had caffeine before, then I'm sure you know this, so I don't need to go into that. But the quantity that they typically use is 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram. Now, this is where they typically find, I forget what the term I'm thinking of is, but it's like the minimum effective dose. I believe is typically 3 milligrams per kilogram, but that's a fucking lot, dude. 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram. If I'm 80 kilograms, 6 milligrams per kilogram, bro, fucking, what is that, 480 milligrams of caffeine? I don't even have that in a day. If I had that in a day, I would probably die. I wouldn't die, but that would be a lot. Point being, that's a fucking lot, and that's in the context of somebody doing like a fucking 3-hour marathon or something, like, where they're probably going to have caffeine during the workout and stuff. So don't have 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram. I wouldn't go above 3 in most cases. Still, like, if you're 80 kilograms, that's 240 milligrams of caffeine. That's a lot. I wouldn't really go above that in my opinion, but it depends on your tolerance and your sensitivity, and everybody metabolizes caffeine a little bit differently. Everybody responds to it a little bit differently, so take it with a grain of salt. I prefer the 1 to 3 milligram per kilogram recommendation. That's what I would recommend. So take with that what you will. Now, again, they typically use 60 minutes is the most common use in the research, and this is based on the fact that caffeine typically peaks in the bloodstream after about 30 to 60 minutes on average. There's a good amount of papers I've seen that say that like 90 to 99% of it is in the bloodstream after like 30 to 45 minutes. So that's what I would generally recommend, is closer to 30 to 45 minutes. But if you want to play it safe, you might want to have it 60 minutes prior, especially if you have a ton of food in your stomach. That's going to slow down the digestion of the caffeine, I believe, at least. So that's another thing to keep in mind. So if you want to play it safe, go closer to 60 minutes. Probably won't make much difference either way, but yeah. So 1 to 3 milligrams per kilogram, 30 to 60 minutes prior, general recommendation. And then I would typically recommend coffee or a supplement, just because the supplement is probably going to be the best bet, because the dose of caffeine is going to be the most standardized, with, depending on the coffee you're drinking, the brewing process will change the caffeine content a little bit. It can actually vary pretty substantially, especially if you're getting it from like cafes. I believe there's been some studies that have looked at that, and it's like the difference is insane, like much more than you would expect. But if you're using like a Keurig or an espresso or whatever, then it's probably not going to be as big of a deal, but it is something to consider still. And the main reason I would suggest coffee or supplements is to avoid things like energy drinks, which are typically going to have sweeteners and gums and stuff that we probably want to avoid, as I already explained. So yeah, there's caffeine. If you want to throw in like alpha GPC and some other things like that, be my guest. Those don't have as good of evidence to my knowledge, and I personally don't use them. If you want to use them, up to you. I can make a separate video about that if you guys want. I would have to research it more, like beta-alanine, things like that. I understand the general picture of the research, but I would have to look more into it if I wanted to give more specific thoughts on it. But yeah, in terms of hydration, this one's tough because, again, there's not that good of research on this. To my knowledge, there's no real research that gives like general recommendations for electrolyte intake, because it varies so much based on your sweat rates, how salty of a sweater you are, the climate you're training in. So many different things will dictate your water loss and your sodium loss, which are going to obviously be primary dictators of your intake of those things. Generally speaking, though, I like a 1 to 1.5 to potentially 1 to 2 ratio of sodium to potassium. So if we're having like 3,000 milligrams of sodium, let's say, then we want to have like 4.5 to 6,000 milligrams of potassium. That's a very general recommendation. Again, take that with a grain of salt. This is one of those things that's going to require personalized coaching for me to give you like a more specific recommendation, I should say. This is based on some research, the 400 to 600 milliliters of water about 2 hours prior. Now, you don't want to chug that. The best way to judge your hydration status, in my opinion, is based on your urine. So if you drink water and you piss it out like a couple minutes later and it's like crystal clear, that's probably a sign that you're hyperhydrated, meaning overhydrated. Whether that means you just had too much fluid and not enough electrolytes, which is usually the case, typically, especially sodium. Sodium is going to be the main player there in terms of fluid retention and fluid balance overall, I should say. That's a sign that you're hyperhydrated, like I said, or that you just chug the water too quickly, which is the same idea. So you probably want to sip on water more gradually and use your urine color, your urine, what word am I thinking of? Like how often you pee. Use that as feedback as to how hydrated you are and go from there. That's what I would generally recommend. Hydration is not going to be that important because if we're not training outside in a hot climate and doing endurance training, if we're just training like 60-minute workout in an air-conditioned gym, it's not going to be as big of a deal. But it is still something to consider 100%. We do want to be hydrated and consider our intakes of these things. Again, this isn't medical advice, and I'm hesitant to recommend anything specific in terms of amounts for sodium and potassium, but experiment with it. Maybe talk to your doctor, depending on how good your doctor is. Yeah, that's all I'll say about that before I get myself in trouble. But I believe that was the last thing here. So yeah, I am absolutely shot. So hopefully something here was helpful. Hopefully this was comprehensive and you have a good idea of how to structure your pre-workout nutrition now. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. DM me on Instagram, on TikTok if you want. Preferably not on there. I don't answer my DMs on there as much. I mean, I do for the most part, but I would prefer if you DM me on Instagram if you're going to DM me. If you want to work with me, if you want more personalized help with any of this stuff, just DM me. I can give you like a personalized nutrition plan if you don't want to do full-on coaching, or I can go over your training, or I can just answer questions for an hour or 30 minutes. We can do a consultation call like that. There's a couple different things I can offer you there. So just hit me up. Happy to help you guys out in whatever way possible. If I can help you for free, I'll do that as well. But yeah, let me know what you guys want to see next. Like always, I have a bunch of ideas. I'll probably record. Work isn't too heavy this week in terms of my actual like jobs. So yeah, hopefully I'll be able to record some videos. But yeah, man, hope you guys have a great day. I'll try to upload this today. Fingers crossed. It's Monday, July 13th. Holy fuck. So yeah, hopefully you guys will be seeing this today. Leave a like, subscribe, comment, please. It'll really help me out. I would really appreciate it. Thank you. Goodbye, my friends. I think. Okay, I don't know.